It had been a long, tiring week. I had just finished a particularly exhausting day at work, filled with back-to-back meetings and a never-ending stream of emails to answer. By the time I got home, I felt like I could collapse right onto the couch and forget about the world for a while. But as soon as I opened the door, the familiar sound of my 7-year-old son Liam racing through the house brought me back to reality. He was jumping up and down with excitement, his little face beaming as he held something in his hands. "Mom! Mom, look what came in the mail!" he shouted, practically running into my arms with a festive-looking envelope. His excitement was contagious, and despite my fatigue, I couldn't help but smile. He handed me the envelope and watched eagerly as I carefully opened it. Inside, nestled in glittery paper, was an invitation to my parents' annual Christmas party. It was an event we had all attended for years, ever since I was a child. My parents, both in their mid-60s now, had always hosted the biggest and most extravagant holiday celebration in the family. They were known for their impeccable taste in decorations, their gourmet food, and their meticulous attention to every detail. It was the one event everyone looked forward to, and every year my mom would spend days preparing the house, setting up the tree, and carefully choosing the right wine pairings for dinner. But as I pulled the invitation out of the envelope and glanced at it, my smile slowly faded. I had been expecting it, of course, but I wasn't prepared for the sting it caused. The invitation read, "You are cordially invited to our annual Christmas party on December 24th at 7 p.m. This year we ask that the celebration be limited to adults only. Unfortunately, we cannot accommodate children, including the children of family members. We hope you understand our decision. With love, Mom and Dad." I sighed deeply and felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. This was how it always went with my parents. Strict rules about everything, including their holiday celebrations. They had always insisted that their party be an adult-only event, claiming that the children would disrupt the atmosphere they wanted to create. They wanted to be free to have adult conversations, enjoy a glass of wine without worrying about spills, and host an elegant event without the chaos children sometimes brought. I had always known this was their preference, but every year it was the same. I was caught in a dilemma of trying to respect their wishes while also balancing my own feelings as a mother. I could already hear the conversation in my head. I had heard it countless times before. If I tried to bring Liam, there would be no room for negotiation. My parents didn't change their minds easily, especially when it came to their traditions. And Liam was too young to understand why I was choosing to leave him at home on Christmas Eve while I went to a party without him. He had been asking about it for weeks. Asking what the decorations would be like, whether there would be any presents for the kids, and whether he could help decorate the tree at Grandma's house. I had to figure out how to explain to him that he wasn't invited. I took a deep breath, trying to brace myself for the difficult conversation ahead. But before I could even begin, Liam tugged on my sleeve, his face full of anticipation. "Mom, what's it say? What's it say?" I smiled at him weakly, still holding the invitation in my hand. "It's an invitation to Grandma and Grandpa's party," I said softly, trying to keep my voice neutral. "But we won't be able to go this year, Liam." His excitement shifted to confusion almost instantly. "What do you mean? Why not? I love Grandma's party. We always go." "Don't we?" I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked down at my son's innocent face. He was barely old enough to fully grasp the concept of exclusion, but I knew this would be one of those moments that left him feeling hurt. I had always tried to shield him from things like that, but this time it felt unavoidable. "Well, Liam, Grandma and Grandpa have decided that this year they want the party to be for adults only," I explained, my voice faltering just a little. "No kids allowed, honey. They think it will be nicer that way." Liam stood there for a moment, staring at me as if he hadn't quite understood. Then his face began to crumple. "But why? Why can't I go?" He paused for a second, his eyes filling with tears, and then added, "I don't want to stay home alone." I knelt down to his level, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill from my own eyes. "You won't be alone, I promise," I said, wrapping my arms around him. "We're going to have a special night just for us. We'll watch your favorite movies, eat popcorn, and have some ice cream. It'll be fun, I promise." "But I don't want to be alone," he repeated, his voice small and sad. "I want to go with you. I want to see the tree and the lights, and I want to see Grandma." I could feel my heart breaking as I held him, knowing that no matter what I said, it wouldn't change the fact that he felt rejected. I could explain my parents' rules until I was blue in the face, but to a 7-year-old, all that mattered was that he wasn't invited, and that hurt. "I know, sweetie," I said, gently stroking his hair. "I know it's hard, but sometimes grown-ups make decisions, and we have to follow them. But hey, we'll make our own Christmas fun. You'll see. We'll make memories, just the two of us." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he hugged me tightly and buried his face in my shoulder. I could feel his small body trembling, and it made me ache with empathy. "I don't want to stay home," he whispered again, and this time I knew there was nothing I could say to make it better. No matter how much I tried to soften the blow, it wouldn't change the fact that he was being left out of something he loved. As the days passed, I continued to feel the weight of that decision pressing down on me. I had tried to focus on the positives, trying to get Liam excited about the idea of a cozy night in, but deep down, I knew he was going to struggle with it. Every time we saw a Christmas commercial or passed by a store with a big display of holiday decorations, he would look at me with longing eyes. Will I get to see Grandma's Christmas tree? Will there be cookies? Will we see Aunt Carol and Uncle Jeff? The questions were endless, and each one made it harder for me to answer with any confidence. Finally, the night of the party arrived. I put on a nice dress, something I had bought for the occasion last year but never worn, and did my best to look excited. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Liam was at home with a bowl of popcorn, curled up on the couch with his favorite movie. I had set up everything as promised, but no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it was fine, I knew it wasn't. The truth was, my parents' party wasn't the same without him. I didn't want to be there without him. As I drove to my parents' house, I looked out the window and wondered how long it would be before I would have to face this situation again. Would Liam ever get used to it? Would I? The night had arrived, the night of my parents' Christmas party. It had been a day filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, I was trying to prepare for what I knew would be an elegant evening with my parents, a tradition I had participated in for most of my life. On the other hand, I was filled with guilt, knowing that Liam, my little boy, would be spending the evening alone. Even if I promised it would be a special night for just the two of us, the whole idea of it felt wrong. Liam had taken the news harder than I thought. Despite my best efforts to explain why he couldn't come to the party, he didn't quite understand. He was too young to comprehend why my parents had made this decision, why their Christmas party was something that only adults could attend. I had tried, and failed, to make him feel excited about our special night together. He had been so disappointed by the exclusion that it was difficult for me to keep up the facade. The entire day had been one long struggle between the two of us, trying to salvage what little enthusiasm we could manage. I could see it on his face when he got up that morning. The sadness was still there, lingering in his eyes. As I made him breakfast, I caught him staring out the window, lost in thought. He would occasionally glance at me as I went about my chores, but when I met his gaze, he quickly looked away. I could sense the resentment, even if he didn't know how to put it into words. For him, Christmas was supposed to be a time for family, a time for fun, and the idea that he was being left out simply didn't make sense. After all, wasn't Christmas about the people you loved? I had tried to shift his attention by suggesting we get the house ready for our movie night. "How about we get the decorations out?" I asked. "You can help me hang the stockings, and we can even put up some lights in the living room." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the same. The twinkle in his eyes wasn't there. He was polite, but distracted, as if he were doing it out of obligation instead of excitement. As the hours ticked away toward the evening, my attempts to brighten his mood felt more and more forced. I found myself looking at the clock constantly, wondering how quickly I could get through this, how soon I could leave him behind and head to my parents' house, where the world of adult conversation and wine would be waiting. But that guilt, that sharp pang in my chest, kept nagging at me, reminding me that the warmth of the party would come at the cost of my son's happiness. He deserved to be there too. But the thought of fighting my parents on this one, their steadfast no children rule, seemed pointless. I had tried to explain my feelings before. I had tried to tell them how important it was to include family, especially kids, in the holiday spirit, but they had never budged. This year, I didn't even have the energy to bring it up. So there I was, caught between two worlds, one where I would honor my parents' wishes, and the other where I would do whatever it took to make my son feel better. At some point in the afternoon, Liam retreated to his room, which was becoming a bit of a pattern lately. I had learned that when things were bothering him, he would often go to his space to process his feelings. I let him be, thinking that maybe if I gave him some space, he would come around. But when I checked on him a little later, he was sitting on his bed, quietly, with his knees pulled up to his chest. I sat down beside him. "Liam," I asked softly, "are you okay?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just stared at the floor, his fingers picking at the blanket. It was rare for him to be so withdrawn, especially on a day like today. Usually, he would be bouncing off the walls with excitement, eager to play or talk about Christmas presents or the snow outside. But today, he was quiet, distant. "I know you're upset," I continued, hoping to coax him into a conversation. "But I promise we'll have fun tonight. We'll have popcorn and ice cream, and we can watch whatever movie you want. You can even stay up a little later than usual. Doesn't that sound fun?" Liam still didn't look up. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he finally spoke, his voice small and uncertain. "I don't want to stay home. I want to go to Grandma's party. Why can't I go?" My heart twisted as he asked the question. I had already explained the reason several times, but hearing him ask again, with so much hurt in his voice, made me realize just how much this meant to him. He didn't understand why he couldn't be there, why everyone else got to go but not him. His disappointment was palpable, and I couldn't find the words to make it better. "It's just the way things are, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound calm, though I was anything but. "Grandma and Grandpa want to have an adult party this year. I know it doesn't seem fair, but they've always done it this way." "But why?" he asked again, his frustration growing. "I'm not a baby. I can be quiet. I can be good." I could feel my chest tighten. I knew he was trying to rationalize it, trying to convince himself, and me, that he was old enough to handle it. He wasn't a baby, he was right about that. But I also knew my parents didn't see it that way. To them, the presence of children, even well-behaved ones like Liam, would disrupt the ambiance of their carefully curated evening. It didn't matter that he was well-behaved. It didn't matter that he loved the traditions, the Christmas tree, the food. They simply didn't want children there. And it was a hard pill to swallow. "I know you're not a baby, Liam," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But sometimes grown-ups have things they want to do without kids around. It doesn't mean you're not important, it's just the way it is this year." He shook his head, clearly not convinced. "I don't want to stay home. I want to go with you." I sighed, brushing my fingers through my hair, feeling completely helpless. "Sweetheart, I can't change the way things are, but I promise you, we'll make it special here. Just the two of us, okay?" I wasn't sure if he heard me or if he just nodded out of habit, but he didn't argue anymore. He simply sat there, his little face twisted in a mixture of sadness and confusion. It was like he had given up trying to fight it. The rest of the afternoon was spent in awkward silence. Liam seemed to be lost in his own thoughts, and I, in turn, was lost in mine. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt gnawing at me. Maybe if I had pushed harder against my parents' rule, maybe if I had fought a little more to include Liam, things would have been different. But now it was too late. The time had come, and I had to leave for the party. As I got ready to go, I tried to keep my emotions in check. I had done my best to prepare Liam for the night ahead, to make it sound as fun as I could, but I knew it wasn't enough. As I slipped into my coat, I took one last look at him. He was sitting on the couch now, staring blankly at the TV, but I could tell he wasn't really watching. His eyes were distant, and his shoulders were slumped. "Hey, bud," I said softly, my voice filled with a tenderness I couldn't mask. "I'm going to go to Grandma's party now, but I'll be back before you know it, okay? We'll do something fun tomorrow, I promise." He didn't look up. "Okay, Mom." I bent down and kissed his forehead, my heart breaking all over again. "I love you." "I love you too," he whispered back. And just like that, I left, the door clicking shut behind me. But as I made my way to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't just leaving him behind, I was leaving a piece of myself behind, too. The evening at my parents' house started as it always did. Formal, polished, and a little stiff. I arrived early, hoping to have a moment to catch up with my parents before the party truly began. The soft glow of the Christmas lights wrapped around the windows, and the shimmering tinsel on the tree greeted me as I stepped through the door. My mom was already in the kitchen, bustling around with plates and trays of food, while my dad was setting the table with a precision that was typical of him. Their house was decorated to perfection, a winter wonderland that would impress any guest, but for me, it only made the space feel colder. I kissed my mom on the cheek and exchanged pleasantries with my dad, and then took a moment to assess the scene around me. The guests had begun to trickle in, a collection of old family friends, cousins, and people I hadn't seen in years. They all looked familiar, yet distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong in this world anymore. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the familiar holiday music filled the air, but there was a disconnect. My thoughts kept drifting back to Liam and his quiet face as I left him at home. I couldn't help it. Every little joy I saw here felt somehow hollow without him. But it wasn't just about him. It was about the tension between what I had left behind and what I was expected to be in this adult space. I had always loved the holiday parties growing up, especially as a child, when there was a feeling of magic in the air, a joy that was amplified by the excitement of being surrounded by family. But now, everything felt like it was out of sync. I had stepped into my parents' world, but I couldn't fully embrace it, not without Liam. Not when he was home alone, waiting for me to return. As the evening wore on, the party started to pick up. Glasses of wine were refilled, plates were passed around, and the conversation shifted between the mundane and the intimate. I tried my best to engage, to participate in the discussions, to laugh at the jokes, but there was a constant, gnawing feeling in my chest. My mom kept asking about work, asking about Liam, and when I told her that he was having a quiet night at home, she simply nodded, not understanding the conflict that was bubbling inside me. I glanced around the room, noting the families who had children and the friends who had younger siblings. I noticed how easy it was for them to join the conversation, to relax in the ambiance. I was happy for them, but it made the loneliness in my chest feel deeper. There were no children here, just adults enjoying the sort of conversation that only people without small children could have. Talk of vacations, wine, and career achievements. It all felt so foreign to me now. As the night wore on, I became more aware of how different things had become for me. I found myself wondering about Liam, about how he was managing at home. I couldn't fully relax. I couldn't focus on the evening, even as the conversation grew livelier, as the holiday cheer filled the room. I was so preoccupied with thoughts of him that when my phone buzzed on the table next to me, I nearly knocked my wine glass over in my haste to check the message. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from my neighbor. Liam showed up at my door. He said he was going to your parents' party. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. How? How had he gotten there? I quickly typed back, "What do you mean? How did he get there?" My neighbor replied almost instantly. He said he took the bus. He's standing here, asking to go to Grandma's house. I think he's a little upset. I felt a surge of panic mixed with a deep sense of guilt. What had I done? Why hadn't I anticipated that he would try to come here, try to make his way to my parents' house? I had known, deep down, that he wasn't going to let this go so easily. He loved Christmas too much, and the idea of being excluded, of not being with his family during such an important time, must have felt unbearable to him. I quickly excused myself from the conversation I had been half engaged in and slipped out of the room, my heart racing as I dialed my neighbor's number. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm on my way, just stay with him, okay?" "Don't worry, he's fine," my neighbor reassured me. "He's just standing at the door. But I'll keep an eye on him until you get here." I couldn't believe it. I didn't know whether to feel impressed by Liam's determination or horrified by his decision to come to a place where he knew he wasn't wanted. He had been so upset about the party, and now, against all odds, he had figured out a way to get there. I rushed out of my parents' house, feeling a mix of emotions as I made my way down the street. The streets were filled with the usual holiday bustle, but I barely noticed it as I walked, my mind focused entirely on Liam. I could feel my breath coming faster, my chest tight, as I tried to process what had just happened. How was I going to explain this to my parents? How was I going to make them understand that Liam had simply had enough, that he didn't want to be left out? As I arrived at my neighbor's house, I saw Liam standing on the porch, his little face looking up at me with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. He had a small backpack slung over his shoulder, probably packed with snacks and his favorite toy, just in case he got lonely during the trip. When he saw me, his face lit up with the sort of grin that only a child who had done something bold could wear. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "I figured it out. I got here all by myself. I wanted to be with you." My heart both swelled with pride and twisted with guilt. My little boy had done something incredible, something that most children his age wouldn't even think of. He had left the safety of our house, taken a bus across town, and ended up on my neighbor's doorstep. All because he couldn't bear the thought of being left out. And here I was, caught between the world of my parents, who had set this strict rule, and the world of my son, who had proven that his need to be with family, his need to be part of something, was stronger than any rule. I knelt down in front of him, looking into his bright eyes. "Liam," I said softly, my voice cracking a little, "how did you find your way here?" He shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I just asked some people on the street. They told me where the bus stop was, and I had enough money for the ride." His little chest puffed out with pride, and I couldn't help but laugh, even through the lump in my throat. "You're so brave," I whispered, hugging him tightly. "But sweetie, what are we going to do now? Grandma and Grandpa won't be happy that you're here." He pulled back slightly, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But I want to be with you. It's Christmas. I want to see Grandma's tree, the lights, everything. I want to have fun." I felt a deep sense of sadness wash over me. How could I have let him stay at home alone when he felt so strongly about being with family? He was right. It was Christmas, and what was Christmas without family, without togetherness? I had been so focused on doing the right thing according to my parents that I had failed to see what my son needed. I took a deep breath and stood up. "Come on, let's go. I'm not going to leave you alone tonight." I couldn't deny the pull in my heart anymore. My son had come all this way to be with me, to be part of the family. How could I refuse him? I took his hand and led him back to the car, and as we drove to my parents' house, I couldn't help but wonder how my parents would react. They were strict about their party rules. Would they see the joy in Liam's eyes and let him stay, or would they insist that he leave? I had no idea what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to turn back. I was going to stand by my son. As we pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, I took a deep breath. It was time to face the music. The night had already been full of surprises, and I wasn't sure what the next one would be, but I had a feeling it would be a game changer. The drive to my parents' house felt like an eternity. The glow of streetlights passed in rapid succession outside the car window, casting brief flashes of light over Liam's small face, still alight with excitement and anticipation. He sat quietly in the passenger seat, his little fingers curled tightly around his backpack as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Every so often he would glance up at me, a smile still tugging at the corners of his mouth, but there was an underlying quiet tension in his eyes that I hadn't seen earlier. I didn't know how my parents would react. They had always been clear about their no children rule. This wasn't the first time I had bent that rule. It wasn't even the first time I had tried to sneak Liam in for just a short time, but every time they had always shut it down, sometimes politely, sometimes less so. I was no stranger to their expectations, and though I loved them deeply, I knew there would be a serious conversation ahead. It didn't matter that it was Christmas. Their house, their rules, and I'd always tried to be respectful of that, even when it hurt. As we pulled up to the familiar house, the place that had always felt like the center of family gatherings, my heart began to race. The car slowed, and I glanced over at Liam, who was now staring out the window at the sight of the Christmas lights twinkling on the trees and around the house. His excitement was palpable, his small face lit up with the kind of joy only children could muster. It was contagious, but I couldn't help feeling a pang of worry. What if my parents rejected him outright? What if they insisted that he leave before he could even step inside? I parked the car in front of the house and turned off the engine. The house seemed so peaceful in the glow of the winter night, but underneath that calm exterior, a storm was brewing. I didn't know how my parents would react, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving Liam alone again. I wasn't going to let my son feel like an afterthought, like an inconvenience. If I had to stand my ground, I would. We sat there for a moment, the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled, neither of us moving. Liam still hadn't said a word, and neither had I. There was an unspoken understanding between us. This wasn't just about a party. It wasn't just about a rule. It was about family and about being where you were meant to be. It was about not letting my son feel the same way I had. Like an outsider in a place where he was supposed to feel at home. Finally, I took a deep breath, turned to Liam, and smiled softly. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded eagerly, his small face lighting up again. "Yeah, I'm ready, Mom," he said, his voice bright. I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out, holding my son's hand as he followed me up the front steps. The house felt different tonight, more imposing, even though it had always been my family's haven. But tonight, I wasn't sure who I was going to face on the other side of that door. Would they accept my son in a way they hadn't before? Would they surprise me? Or would they uphold their boundaries as they had always done? I rang the doorbell, and there was a pause before the sound of footsteps echoed from inside. My father opened the door, and I immediately felt the weight of his gaze on me. He looked surprised to see Liam standing next to me. For a moment, there was silence. His face, usually warm and welcoming, was unreadable. "Mom," I began. "Dad, I know you said no children, but I couldn't leave him at home alone tonight. He wanted to come, and I didn't want to disappoint him." My voice felt small and uncertain, but I stood my ground. My son's small hand gripped mine tightly, and I squeezed it, drawing strength from his presence. My father glanced at Liam, who was nervously shifting from foot to foot, clearly trying his best to appear calm despite the uncertainty of the situation. "I'm sorry," my father said, his tone as neutral as ever, "but you know the rules." For a brief moment, I felt my heart sink, and I thought of turning around, of taking Liam back to the car, back to a quiet night at home where we could pretend everything was okay. But then I glanced down at Liam, and something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let him believe that his worth was contingent on rules. I wasn't going to let my parents' idea of a perfect evening overshadow his joy. "I understand," I said, standing a little straighter. "But this is Christmas. We're family. He's my son, and I don't think he should have to be excluded from that. If you can't make room for him tonight, I'm sorry. But I won't stay either." There was a long silence as my father looked at me, his face unreadable. I felt Liam's grip tighten on my hand, and I squeezed back, silently encouraging him to stay strong, just like I was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my father sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly. All right, he said quietly, stepping aside and motioning for us to enter. "But just this once, okay? This doesn't become a habit." I blinked, taken aback. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't an enthusiastic invitation, but it was an acknowledgement that sometimes family meant more than rules. That sometimes you could bend a little to accommodate the people you love. Liam's eyes lit up at the invitation, and for the first time that night, a real smile spread across his face. He squeezed my hand, and I could feel his joy radiating from him. It was the smile of a child who had won the battle for belonging, a battle I hadn't known he was fighting until now. Inside, my mother had already returned to the kitchen, her back to us, when she heard our footsteps. She turned around, her eyes widening when she saw Liam standing beside me. Her gaze flickered between the two of us, and I could tell she wasn't thrilled by the development. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she adjusted her apron and walked over to Liam with a forced smile. "Well, I suppose you're here now," she said in a tone that felt more like acquiescence than anything else. But then, to my surprise, she bent down to his level and spoke more gently. "I'm glad you're here, Liam. We have plenty of food, and I'm sure your grandparents will be happy to see you. Why don't you go tell them Merry Christmas?" Liam, who had been nervously holding his breath, broke into a full grin. "Okay, Grandma," he exclaimed, dashing off toward the living room, where my parents' friends were gathered by the tree. I watched him go, and for a moment I felt like I could finally breathe again. I had expected more resistance, more of the harshness I'd grown accustomed to from my parents, but tonight, perhaps it was the Christmas spirit, or perhaps it was something else. There was a shift, a small but significant one. They had allowed my son into their home, into their world, and it had been the right decision. I didn't know if this would change everything, but for tonight, it was enough. My mom glanced at me, her face softening a little, though she still wore a bit of a frown. "I hope this doesn't become a habit," she said, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard before. I smiled, finally feeling like I could let my guard down. "I know, Mom," I replied. I couldn't let him miss out on this." We stood there in silence for a moment, just watching Liam, who was now standing by the tree, chatting with my aunt. He was content. He was where he belonged. As the evening unfolded, something miraculous happened. My parents seemed to relax. The tension that had filled the house earlier began to dissipate. It wasn't as if they suddenly embraced the idea of children at their parties, but there was a shift in the air. My father, who had always been the stickler for rules, seemed to soften, even joking with Liam about the presents under the tree. My mom, though still a little uncomfortable with the situation, allowed Liam to help decorate the tree and showed him where the Christmas cookies were. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the typical holiday I had imagined, but it was real. It was family. By the end of the night, as I watched Liam excitedly show me the ornament he had placed on the tree with my mom, I realized that I had made the right choice. Not just for Liam, but for me too. I had chosen family over tradition, connection over rules. And in that moment, it felt like we had all won. When it was time to go, my parents didn't protest. They didn't make a big deal about Liam's presence or the no children rule. They simply wished us a Merry Christmas, and as we stepped out into the cold night, I felt the weight of the evening lift. It had been a long, emotional journey, but it was worth it. We had all found our way back to each other, and for once it felt like the Christmas spirit was alive and well. As Liam and I drove home, the silence between us was comfortable. He had his head pressed against the window, watching the snowflakes fall. I glanced over at him, a soft smile tugging at my lips. He had been happy tonight. And, for once, so had I. We didn't need perfect. We didn't need everything to go according to plan. All we needed was to be together, and that, in the end, was enough.